I'm with Sarah Woodyard, Senior Apprentice Milliner and Mantua Maker at Colonial Williamsburg, and we're going to be discussing 18th century shoemaking. So Sarah, what would be the equivalent to Christian Louboutin and Jimmy Choo in the 18th century?
Well, I think when it comes to looking at, say, Martha's shoe purchases, there's two shoes that come to mind. The first being, of course, her wedding shoes. Beautiful purple silk satin, beautiful stitched white rand that has some gorgeous silver spangles on it, silver embroidery and silver lace. That's going to be very expensive, very exclusive, which I think is what we think about when we think of, say, like a Manola Blahnik or a Jimmy Choo today. And the second being her white silk satin pumps that have gold embroidery on them. Also would have been very high-end and quite beautiful.
So Sarah, why would she buy shoes an ocean away when she could purchase them in nearby Alexandria?
It's interesting as it relates to economics. I think that's what we really need to discuss, is the economics of 18th century Virginia. Of course, the Washingtons live at Mount Vernon, a very large plantation that's exporting out lots of cash crops. So they're exporting, obviously, things like tobacco and salted fish and grain and so forth. And therefore, their money is literally over in London. And so it's easier for them to, say, have an agent buy their shoes in London and then export them back to Mount Vernon. So they're acting independently of themselves. What's interesting, though, is that an average Virginian, like I mentioned earlier, would be able to go to, say, Alexandria and just buy shoes that are also of Gresham or Didsbury brand, and probably buy the exact same type of shoes that the Washingtons are ordering directly to Mount Vernon.
How did the Revolutionary War impact shoe purchasing in America?
Of course, war is going to be a very hard time in most people's lives, and the beginning of a war has a lot of emotion surrounding it. I think we have to think about kind of the political leanings of individuals and how that's going to really reflect their, say, consumer choices. Kind of the accepted scholarship of this point is that about a third of the individuals were really staunchly for revolution, about a third wanted to be loyal to the crown, and about a third didn't really have an opinion, but probably chose according to whatever was best for their person or for their business. So as it relates to clothing and shoe choices, I think that some people would be wearing country-made shoes as kind of this political pageantry in a way, wearing homespun clothes, at least at the beginning of the war, to kind of show their political allegiance to, say, the colonies. However, the reality of that is most people can't actually buy locally made items. People are so reliant on London-made goods, and when you're so accustomed to the London quality of leather, the London quality of fabrics, you're probably through a war that's turbulent and very stressful, wanting to dress as well as you can. So luckily, in the middle of the war, we're still importing things, but of course we can get things from the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, and even through like the Dutch, get British-made goods. So there's people still buying shoes that are made elsewhere, or potentially importing, say, black silk satin, black calamanco, and then taking them to a local shoemaker and having them made that way.
So how many pairs of shoes would an average colonist own, and how might this figure differ from what Martha Washington would have owned?
It's hard to answer that question because unfortunately we don't have the records to really know what the average, say, Virginia woman was purchasing. However, with fashion changing 4 to 6 times per year, and with the average woman having access to Gresham and Didsbury's being imported to local merchants and millinery shops, they're probably going to be buying shoes with the season, which correlates with a London shoemaker who averages that his customer was buying about 4 pairs per year. If we look at the inventories and the records, say from the Washington family, in the early 1760s, Martha was buying roughly 7 pairs of shoes per year, and then by the late 1760s, early 1770s, she was buying between 10 and 12 pairs of shoes per year.
So Sarah, how long would a pair of, say, women's dancing pumps last?
That's a very interesting question. I think that's a question that a lot of people think about when they think of 18th century footwear. Because of course, when you look at 18th century shoes, the sole looks so thin, and the upper portion of the shoe being made out of fine silks looks so delicate. However, it's kind of an optical illusion when it comes to the design of the shoes. The way that a shoemaker is actually going to be making, say, the uppers, they're going to be using delicate fabrics for the outside, but they're lined with really sturdy linens and sometimes leather. As it relates to the soles, they're actually trimming down right around the sole to make the edge of the sole look very thin. However, what your foot is actually stepping on is 2/3 thicker than what we actually see. So the idea of, say, how long would a pair of shoes last is probably going to be lasting as long as fashion lasts. And you're not going to find women, say, dancing through one pair of shoes in an evening, as one Virginia woman writes. I think that was more, say, literary metaphor, talking about how she danced a lot, and maybe at the end her white silk satin slippers might have been really dirty. At that point it might have been more of a dirt factor versus physically dancing through the shoes. And again, looking at Martha Washington's purchases, she buys about 3 pairs of silk shoes a year that she would have danced in. And so, for her, every year, maybe 2 to 3 new shoes would be a good number to have.